Hi, I'm John Strum. And this past fall, I attended ECTRIMS, the largest MS research conference in the world. During the conference, I had some quick conversations with some of the experts who were on hand to present their work to the more than 9,000 attendees. In a moment, we're going to see one of those conversations. And then you'll hear from some folks who are living with MS who are going to share their perspectives on the topics we discuss. I'm at ECTRIMS 2023 in Milan, and I'm speaking with Dr. Anthony Feinstein. Dr. Feinstein is a professor of psychiatry at the University of Toronto, and his expertise is in the neuropsychiatry of multiple sclerosis. Dr. Feinstein is also the principal investigator in a large international clinical trial called CogEx. It tested whether a 12-week program of aerobic exercise or computer-based cognitive rehabilitation, or maybe a combination of both, could improve the thinking speed in people living with progressive MS who had shown signs of cognitive changes. It's always nice to talk with you, Dr. Feinstein, and it's especially nice to be with you in person.
Likewise. Thank you, John.
The results of the CogEx study were just recently published. What can you tell us about the study, and what did you learn?
So as you mentioned, it was a 12-week study looking at processing speed, which is very sensitive to decline in people with progressive MS. I want to stress this was an international study, 6 countries: Canada, United States, United Kingdom, Belgium, Denmark, and Italy. A large sample size of over 300 people with progressive MS who had advanced disability, a mean EDS score of 6. So this was a group that were neurologically unwell, just on the cusp of going into a wheelchair. And I want to stress that this was a group that was cognitively impaired. So to get into the study, you had to have deficits in processing speed. And then we randomized them to one of 4 groups, either exercise plus cognitive rehabilitation, cognitive rehab plus sham exercise plus sham cognitive rehab, and a double sham. So there were 4 arms to the study. And we put them through their paces, 2 sessions a week over 12 weeks, 24 visits. In the midst of a pandemic as well, we shut us down for a period, then we kind of started up again. And our primary outcome measure was processing speed, measured by a very sensitive test called the Symbol Digit Modalities Test. And our primary hypothesis was that the combined interventions would be better than a single intervention alone, which in turn would be better than the sham interventions. That was our hypothesis.
And what did the outcome show?
We didn't show that. So the combined intervention was no more effective than either exercise or cognitive rehabilitation alone. But the interesting part about the study was that we saw a significant improvement in processing speed across the board in a high percentage of people. Now we know there's a threshold for what is clinically significant. If your performance improves by 4 points on the SDMT, group data, that tells you this is a clinically significant marker. If the improvement is 8 points or more on an individual basis, that's significant as well. So using that as a threshold, we found that almost 2/3 of our subjects, of our participants, showed an improvement in processing speed at 12 weeks. And this was maintained in about 50% by 6 months. So even after they stopped their exercise, and the cognitive rehab, in 50% of the sample, we saw a significant improvement in processing speed.
You know, we really don't get to talk about a lot of things that can improve symptoms for people living with progressive MS. So this sounds like particularly encouraging news.
You know, there's good news. I mean, we were disappointed that our primary hypothesis, the combined intervention didn't, show greater benefits, but we were pleasantly surprised by the individual interventions helping people with progressive MS. And we didn't know, before we started the study, we didn't know that people with progressive MS, advanced MS, could indeed show a processing speed improvement of this magnitude.
Something you just said spurred a question. MS can be isolating, and progressive MS can be even more isolating.
Yes.
Do you think the results of the trial specifically make the case for either exercise or cognitive rehabilitation, or could the results also make the case for cognitive improvement derived from an individual's involvement, whether that involvement is in a clinical trial or some other activity?
I mean, that's an excellent question. We can't answer that with great certainty, but the point that you raise is absolutely germane. So we do believe that exercise or cognitive rehabilitation can help, But there is this extra component that you mentioned, because these were individuals with advanced physical disability, sitting at home, many of them. They feel that life has passed them by, they're not working, they're socializing less, they lead very quiet, truncated lifestyles. And then for some of them, you've got this 12-week period of relatively intense activity. We provided taxi transport to people so that they would all come in for their appointments, which meant that our dropout rate was very low, 8%, for a very demanding study, 8%. And so this was a group that was brought into hospital twice a week. They had to structure that, they had to plan that, so that's tapping into some executive functioning.
Right.
Then they came into the rehab center, they saw people, they socialized, they interacted with the research assistants, they got exercise, they got cognitive rehab, or they got sham, whatever it was, but they were getting to do things. They had to fill out patient report outcome questionnaires. So it was a very busy, very intense time for them. And they did this for 12 weeks, 24 visits, at the end of which they said to us, many of them, they wrote us letters, heartfelt letters saying, this was a wonderful experience. We felt we'd been forgotten. And suddenly we've got a life that's full of activities, and we loved it. They loved coming in. Even though they were put, some of them, through a very rigorous exercise regime, which for some of them was not easy, they still welcomed it because there was attention. And so you raise this fascinating question: how do you quantify all of that in terms of helping people's cognition? Because what it speaks to is we are boosting cognitive reserve. We're bringing in intellectual activity, physical activity, plus social activity. The three pillars of keeping us active. And so for that intense 12-week period, we were boosting cognitive reserve. Maybe that was a critical variable over here that helped people as well. Now, our study wasn't designed to explore that, but it's an interesting hypothesis, and we touch on it in our paper.
Well, hopefully your study or another study will look at just increasing the level of engagement among people with progressive MS to see what the result might be.
Yeah, we know that. We know that from the aging literature. People who age well keep their brains active. You do things. You don't sit at home after retirement with your remote control and watch television. That's very bad news for your intellect. Right? Those are the people who are going to be at greater risk for dementia. So it's the same analogy over here, that keep the brain active, keep people doing things. It's good for their cognition. Their processing speed increases.
You're here in Milan attending ECTRIMS. It's the largest MS research conference in the world. What's important about this conference? How or why do we see around 10,000 researchers and clinicians make their way to ECTRIMS every year?
Because it's an exciting time in MS research. There are lots of new developments. There are treatments now for multiple sclerosis. There are therapies that weren't there in the past. And now people are also starting to realize that there are other aspects of MS which are very important, like cognition. So there's a very big cognitive component to this meeting. So you meet your colleagues, you learn from them, they learn from us. There's a great exchange of ideas. It's become a very important meeting.
Well, Dr. Anthony Feinstein, I want to thank you again for all you do to improve the quality of life for people living with MS. And once again, thanks for meeting me and talking with me today.
Thank you for your interest, John.
I'm John Strum, and this Real Talk MS ECTRIMS Extra has been made possible through a grant from Sanofi. We've just watched my conversation with Dr. Anthony Feinstein, and joining me to provide some perspective from people who are living with MS are Sean Feliciano and Emily Doyle Pinho. Sean, Emily, welcome.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Emily, when were you diagnosed with MS?
In 2004, May of 2004, shortly after I graduated college.
You just heard Dr. Feinstein talk about the outcome of the CogEx study, and the outcome is kind of interesting. A majority of the participants showed improvement in cognitive processing speed, regardless of whether they participated in aerobic exercise or computer-based cognitive rehabilitation, or both. What are your thoughts about the study, Emily?
It almost seems as if having a support group or having a social obligation might also have a benefit with MS, at least having to deal with maintaining a research study and having to go to locations and for the research study, maybe. But it's good that either way, both physical exercise and cognitive exercise benefited.
So I'm curious, Emily, do you have any specific activity to keep your mind sharp?
I love the Wordle. I'm addicted to the Wordle every morning. It's like my favorite part of waking up. But then I think also yoga and running have been helpful, and even meditation have helped me uh, when I've used those natural exercises. I've seen a benefit from it.
Sean, can you tell us when you were diagnosed with MS?
I was diagnosed in September of 2009, and I was getting ready to run my first marathon when I knew that something wasn't correct, wasn't normal, especially with my vision.
And what are your thoughts about the CogEx study that we just heard Dr. Feinstein discuss?
I actually thought it was fascinating because he did not find that correlation that he was looking for. But as Emily stated, it's still the exercise still is important for all of us that are have been diagnosed with MS. But I did find it interesting that the social aspect of it was that much more prevalent. um, I think I've seen some of it with the support groups that I've gone to, where somebody could be very shy or maybe not going out very much, but then once they get into that support group environment, they start talking and exchanging ideas. And there's obviously that MS component that we all have in mind, and that brings us together. And you start seeing people really open up. And yeah, I wasn't too startled by that. I was more startled by the exercise, the physical and the cognitive exercise.
MS can feel isolating. And I think that's especially true when you're living with progressive MS. The CogEx study recruited people with progressive MS. And during our conversation, I asked Dr. Feinstein if the outcome of the study might be a result of engaging the study participants in the study itself. As you mentioned, the social aspects. What do you think, Sean? Do you have a sense that the isolation faced by many people living with MS could be a factor when it comes to cognitive decline?
I definitely think so. Not only in MS, but I think Dr. Feinstein also talked about the fact that as we get older, sometimes we don't have those social aspects. Sometimes we tend to watch TV a little bit too much, and obviously that doesn't help our with our cognition. So I definitely think that just being around people, I know for myself, going to work, talking with people around me at work or clients definitely helps with my cognition, because I have to remember conversations. There's that interchange between people. So I definitely think for someone who has progressive MS, especially, it's really really important. The loneliness can definitely manifest itself into other diseases and sometimes even death.
What about you, Emily? Do you have a sense that isolation could be a factor when it comes to experiencing cognitive decline?
I think isolation could have a lot of negative effects on somebody, e- even unbeknownst to that person. And I think it's important. I think social interaction is kind of important for most people, if not especially people with MS who have a disease that can be triggered by stressors in their environment, because socialization has been shown to benefit people with depression as well. And I think depression, fatigue, and lethargy kind of coincide with MS, and you might not especially want to go out and be social because you won't feel good, but it's important that people with MS especially try to do it anyway.
Sean Feliciano, Emily Doyle Pinho, thanks for spending a few minutes talking with me today.
Thank you,
Thank you,
John.
John. We I appreciate you having us on.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to hear more about the amazing MS research taking place in laboratories all around the world, I hope you'll join me every week for the Real Talk MS podcast.